Welcome everyone to Excel Power Hour. Today is March 1st, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and this is tips and tricks for Excel Power users. Today's episode, VLOOKUP and pivot tables. This should be a very popular episode because it is one of the most visited or requested topics I have seen in my YouTube channel. People are asking for pivot tables and VLOOKUPs. So I am sure that a lot of you are going to love to learn about these two topics. Today's content, we're going to spend about 5 minutes to talk about the Excel Power Hour, the webinar series, and I'll talk about myself, and I'll do a presentation on VLOOKUPs and pivot tables, maybe for about 20 minutes or so, and then Q&A. So this should be a shorter than my normal webinars, which are an hour, in some cases more than an hour long. So it should be shorter just because it's a more defined topic. Now, what is Excel Power Hour? We are tips and tricks for Excel Power users. We're a monthly webinar series that you register for and automatically get invitations for. We're building a website or blog that's all going to be about Excel topics, and that's going to be excelpowerhour.com. And also join the Facebook group, probably the most valuable place to share information, ask and share information about Excel. It's going to be on the Facebook group. So just search Excel Power Hour in Facebook groups and request to join, and I will accept you. Now, this is a monthly webinar. First Wednesday of each month will be 30 to 60 minutes long. Register once, you have access to all the episodes. We may have a special episode that's been created with a sponsored or collaborated in some sort. You will get notification of those, and also we'll let you know these are sponsored episodes as well. We currently don't provide CPE or IRS CE because that's not how we're set up to be. But if we have enough folks that request it, we may do it in future webinars. Now, the discussions are going to be actual tips and tricks in Excel and some Excel add-ons. About myself, I'm Hector Garcia. I'm an accountant and a QuickBooks consultant. I'm also certified in Excel, and I have a regular accounting firm that does a lot of technology work and tax work. And many a times, because of my accounting work, I have to take data from Excel, maybe bank data or inventory item data, whatever, and manipulate it in Excel before I can do anything with it functionally for accounting purposes. So almost everything I learn is with the context of me preparing data for some sort of accounting work. Now, I will ask you about yourself real quick. Oh, you did. Oh, sorry, there's the results. So 97% of you are colleagues of mine, you're accounting professionals or tax preparers, and only 3% are other in the non-accounting world. Awesome. Everybody's welcome to be, regardless of whether you're an accountant or not. But of course, most people that are here are accountants because mostly what I talk is accounting topics. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on and talk about pivot tables. Now, pivot tables are extremely sorry, not pivot tables, VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP is a function in Excel that is very well received for people that know how to use it, and typically very ill received for the folks that don't understand it. And it's extremely powerful, and it's technically outdated. Excel has come up with new formulas that are actually more powerful than VLOOKUP and other functionality that's more powerful than VLOOKUP, especially on Excel 2016. However, VLOOKUP, it still reigns king and supreme for quick searches. And once people learn how to use it, they really don't want to learn how to use something new. So let's talk about the structure of the VLOOKUP. So the formula is obviously VLOOKUP, and then you have basically four components. The first component is the value. So what am I searching in the VLOOKUP? What do I want to match from one table to the other table and return the information? Table array, it's where, what's the source data, okay? So what's the source data in which I want to search that value? That's the second syntax that you see there. The third one is column index, which basically means that I'm going to search the data within a table, and the index data that I'm searching is always going to be the first column, and what column am I going to return information from? And then range lookup, it's true and false, and we can discuss that in an example. That is actually impossible to explain verbally what the range lookup true false option is. So that's in a nutshell, that explanation of that. So let me go ahead and open up Excel. And while Excel loads, I just want to show you something. If you go into Google and you search Vlookup PDF, just search for Vlookup PDF, just as simple as that, and click on the one from Microsoft. Okay, there's a Vlookup refresher, and that's going to be that same PDF document that I screenshot there, but that's going to be 3 pages worth. This is a full page. So you print this out and have it as a cheat sheet, and it's basically the best way to have summarized information about VLOOKUPs. So that's actually probably one of the best resources I can give you about VLOOKUPs. A lot of people don't even know that exists over there. So again, just Google Vlookup PDF and just click on the one that says Microsoft. I don't know what the other ones do, but just click on the one that says Microsoft, and that would be good enough. All right, so let me go ahead and open an Excel file, and I'm going to open most of my examples. It's with bank data. I love bank data because it's pretty much as real as it gets. It's data that we picked from the bank, so we really don't get a say to how clean it is or how complete it is. So we have a lot of opportunity to clean it up. And what you're seeing here, more or less, is, let me just hit select all here. This is the raw data I downloaded from my bank literally just now. So you're going to see all sorts of bank transactions, money coming in, money coming out, and we're going to use some practical examples of how VLOOKUPs work on this specific scenarios, on bank data scenarios. Now, VLOOKUPs can work in all sorts of scenarios, but I'm going to use this specific example as one. So again, the context is I'm looking at a downloaded transactions from the bank, and there's all sorts of information. And in our previous webinar last month, which the recording, you should be able to find it in YouTube, the February recording, we talk about how to clean up this data. That was like basically the entire episode was based on cleaning up this data. So I don't want to focus too much on cleaning up this data. I want to focus on something called VLOOKUPs. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and select my entire data set here. I'm going to go to the data tab and then click on filter. Now that's probably one of the most important basic things that you should know is you want to filter your data and be able to use specific data and columns to narrow down on the specific areas that I want to work with. So for example, I want to work just with checks. So I can take my filter on the type column and just unselect everything and just select check, and that is going to show me only checks. Okay. Now, if I didn't have a check column, because obviously every bank would have information different, so I can't make the assumption of how the data will look from your bank, we may have a column that has a check number. And in that case, we can run the filter as well and uncheck blanks. And as long as I have everything else that has a check number checked, that should do the same function and narrow down all my checks. Okay, perfect. So that's kind of first step. Now, the other second assumption we want to make is that the banks never tell you what the payee is, never tell you who paid you on the checks. Normally, this is how it comes. You get a check number, you get an amount, you get a date, but you don't get to know the person's name. Somebody, either you or a client, if you happen to be an accounting professional, has to then look at the physical checks and transcribe them in there. But in many cases, we don't want to give the user doing this the entire spreadsheet because they may get confused. They may overwrite other data. We may want to give them just a separate spreadsheet altogether that only contains the number, the date, the payee, and the amount, and have that person literally sit there and type all the payee information in there without messing up my original. Let me just make this bold, make it easier to read. So without messing up my original spreadsheet. So if somebody was to do that and enter data in another spreadsheet, in another sheet altogether, then how do I take this information and bring it over here? Now, yes, I guess you could copy and paste. The problem is to copy and paste, you're making the assumption that the columns are going to line up 100%. So the best thing to do is it's called a VLOOKUP. Basically, what is it that I want to do? I want to figure out how to tell Excel, find out if this check number, and I'm going to highlight it in blue here, find out if this check number, it's also somewhere in this spreadsheet. There it is. Okay. And then if when you find out that it is on that row, I want you to return to give me the information from the 1, 2, 3, the third column. So in a nutshell, I want to figure out how to tell Excel, if you find this number in this table, give me 1, 2, 3, the third result from the table. That's what a VLOOKUP table is. So the first thing I want to do is I want to select the data from the table I want to search in. And typically I can just hand select it like that, or I can just click anywhere there and hit Control A on the keyboard. And normally that will select all the information in there. So the first thing I want to do is select it. And I also want to make it a table. Best thing to do is select the data and then hit Control T on the keyboard. And that's going to take a prompt, the Create Table button. And then basically says my table has headers. That's normally going to be the case. And then I hit OK. And what that does is it creates the table, it creates the data set as a table. So when I select the entire data set here, this now should have a table name, and having a table name is going to prevent this from moving up and down on the reference formula. So this table right here, I'm going to give it a name. I'm just going to call it, oh, here it is. Here it is, table 1. So this table has a name. It's called table 1. It's already there. So I'm going to make reference to table 1 instead of making reference to the range. So let's go back here. And then here we're going to call this pay. And then we're going to do the formula now, right? So what I'll do is let me just make the font bigger to make sure it's something that you can read really clear here through the webinar. And then I'm going to start typing the formula. The formula is equals VLOOKUP. Okay. Open the parentheses, and we got this first value, and the syntax is lookup value. So basically, I'm going to say, what value am I looking up? So I'm going to look up this one, the check number. Okay, so that would be E14 in this case. The second one says table array. So from where am I searching this information? So I'm going to go into another tab, or maybe another spreadsheet. Typically, if it's another spreadsheet, just copy and paste it in a new tab. And then I'm going to select my table array here, okay? And then when I go back here, you're going to notice that this will, whoops, too many clicks. Let me try that again. VLOOKUP equals parentheses, this value on which table array. I will select the table array here, okay? Select it again, okay? And then switch. And the problem with doing that is it gets a little cumbersome with the clicking. So that's one of the huge advantages to having the table named, that I actually don't have to select the table array. I can just literally type table 1. And this is the biggest shortcut in the world. It's naming your table, so I don't have to go back and forth the tabs and potentially get confused with what data array I'm selecting. So by giving it table 1, it knows that no matter what, is only going to look up within this table. And then the next one says column index. So what this is asking me is, what column is it? 1, 2, 3, column C. So I'm going to return column C, which is the third column. And I'm going to put in the next one, the number 3. Then I'm going to put comma. And it's extremely important. And this is going to make more sense when we do the next example on the true approximate. This is not an approximate search. This is an exact match. So I have to type false. False means it's not an approximate search, it's an exact match, which basically means if there's no match, you're going to return bad information. You're going to return an error. So I'm going to press enter, and you're going to notice that John Smith came in. And basically I can grab that, bring it down, all the way down, and notice that all of my vendor names are going to come in. Now I do have this funky font size. I'll bring that down to regular font size. But by dragging it down, we're going to see that payee work just fine. So let me just fix my font size again. And I'll make the entire thing maybe 16 point. So this is how VLOOKUPs work, and this is the true value of VLOOKUPs. Now, there's another challenge to this, is now I want to get this data in here. Now, so I always do a VLOOKUP in a completely separate column, and then I come back and copy and paste. So what I normally do is I select the the data set, and this is filter data. So remember, I have a filter here. So it's filter data, and I'm going to right click copy. And the way you know it's filter data is because you see those marching ants lines in between some of the cells in there. And then I'm going to come in here and make sure it's aligned 100%. I'm going to right click and then do paste special. And then I'm going to do paste special values. And I'm going to skip the blanks just to make sure that I don't paste over any blanks over. So I'm going to hit OK. And that's basically going to bring that information in there. Sometimes it's worth it to undo the filters because you may have a little bit of a weird type of behavior. So let me bring this back into 16 font and just kind of show you. And what I'll do is I'll sort these by check number. That way they're all together here. And I think I may have broken a formula here somewhere. Let me start this over. And I know exactly what I did. What I did was I didn't have a filter on this line as well. So let's go ahead and copy. I'm going to copy this VLOOKUP. I'm going to cut this formula real quick. I'm going to delete this altogether and do it again. But this time around, I'm going to remove the filters. And this could be very confusing with filters. And again, I made that error on the spot. And then I'm going to resort these by check number. That way I have them all next to each other and I can avoid that potential issue that I had. And then run that formula again. Okay, this time around I have to make sure that I make the right reference, and then I can just copy and drag that down. Perfect. Okay, and just to make sure that if I'm going to copy and paste over, I'm going to select now my new data set and do data filter because I'm working with filter data, and that could mess up my copy and paste. So again, let's go ahead and select the data here, hit copy, come to the right side, paste special, values, skip blanks, and hit OK. And that's going to now replace the payee for my check numbers, but not replace all my other information. Perfect. So that's in a nutshell how VLOOKUP works. Now that's called the VLOOKUP false. Okay, so let me resort these by date. So now we have the information resorted back in there. Let me do the font so it's all uniform at font 16. And let's now talk about what they called the not the false approximate, but the true approximate. Let me clean this up a little bit more. That way, this is more readable. Okay, so I'm going to make this all the same distance here. So I'm going to have one more column here, and I'm going to call it value. Okay, and then you're going to see kind of where we're going to go from here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the VLOOKUP search a particular range on the number, and based on that range is going to tell me it's low, it's high, something like that. Okay, but the first thing I want to do is I have to keep in mind that checks are negative. Checks and payments are negative, deposits are positive, and I want to search this by absolute value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert one more column here, and I'm going to call it absolute value. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit equals, and then I'm going to run a formula called ABS, which means absolute value of the amount. And what that's going to do in a nutshell is if it's positive, leave it in positive. If it's negative, convert it to positive. That way I'm looking at absolute values and I'm ignoring whether it's a positive or negative number. That's really important for this next thing here, where I'm going to give this a value like low, high, or medium. Let's call it that. So in another column altogether, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put together a chart. I'm going to say from 0 to 100, we're going to call this low value. From 100 to 1,000, we're going to call this medium value, and this is going to have a lot of value once we do our pivot table. And then from 1,000 plus, we're going to call it high. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this tiny little chart I have here to tell this spreadsheet, hey, look up this value on this table. And if it's between 0 to 100, put low. If it's 100 to 1,000, put medium. If it's 1,000 plus, put high. So first thing I did, like I said, we always are going to select the table and hit Control T. Always create the table. Make sure you have a table put together. Always have a table put together. That way we have a name table, it's called table 2, which is going to make it much easier for us to do our VLOOKUP. So there we go, equals VLOOKUP. Let me make the font bigger again, because we're in a webinar and I know it's better to have bigger font. So we're going to do VLOOKUP, and we're going to search for the absolute value, positive or negative, and we're going to look within the table arranged called table 2. Remember, it's called table 2. And the column we're going to look up in this case will be the second column, which is that high, low, medium number. And then at the end, I'm going to put true for a positive value. And by the way, anything in Excel that is asking you for a true, false, if you leave it blank, that's by default a true, right? So I don't have to type true. I can just leave it blank and it will have the same effect. But just to make it easier, I'm going to put true, and then I'm going to press enter, and then click and drag this all the way down. And now my numbers are going to be represented in terms of high, low, medium, and high, low, and medium. Now, why is this important? Let me go back and change it back to a smaller font. Why is this important? Well, it's important for pivot tables, which is the next sort of section that we're going to do here. So again, in summary, that's a pivot. That's a VLOOKUP. So I'm going to run a quick polling question. I just wanted to know, kind of gauge whether so far you learned something new on pivot on VLOOKUP. So for now, I just want to know whether VLOOKUPs are at least have been something new for you. So just answer that polling question real quick. It will help me. Okay. And I have about 80% of the votes in. Okay, please, helps me to have that answer just for future webinars. Okay, perfect. Go ahead and finish this polling question. Appreciate your feedback very much. Okay, and it looks like 62% something new, 32% we're familiar with most of it, and no, new 100% what I was talking about. I'm sorry for those folks. For the ones that said no, go ahead and put your questions in the bottom. Maybe I have a chance to answer them if you actually happen to have. But this is the VLOOKUP is one of those big mysteries that if you don't know the syntax, especially that last true and false, people always have. Okay, so let's now move on to pivot tables. Now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the same bank data I have here. And by the way, remember I already mentioned to you that on the previous webinar, on the February webinar, we talked about cleaning up this data. So I don't want to spend too much time about cleaning up this data. I recommended the reasons why. And before you do a pivot table, you should clean up the data, but I just don't, for this particular sake, I don't want to discuss too much the cleaning up of the data, but you're going to see the value in cleaning it up before you pull a pivot table. The other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new column in which I'm just going to return a debit and credit result. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a formula here, if formula. I'm going to say if this number, it's above, let's say 0, basically if it's a positive number. If this number is above 0, tell me whether it's a debit or a credit. So I'm going to put here credit. Otherwise, and basically the last column is otherwise. Otherwise, just give me the word debit. And I have to make sure that because I'm returning back words, I have to put them in quotes. So I'm saying if the number is bigger than 0, give me a credit. If it's not, give me the word debit. And basically that allows me to bring that down, drag it all the way down, and basically have debits and credits. And that's going to be useful. Trust me, it's going to be useful. Although the bank has debits and credits as type here, it does mix up a third dimension, which is check. And that's actually kind of confusing. So I prefer to create my own debit and credit one to have. Now, so right after, again, I clean up the data, I add the additional columns that I want. I got the absolute value, I got the actual value name that I wanted to give it. Then I'm going to take this entire data set and create a table. Again, creating a table is really valuable. So Control T, I'll create a table on it. It actually automatically formats it. But what's really nice about creating the table, it just makes it really easy to create a pivot table. So now I'm going to go to the Insert tab and click on Pivot Table. And then it says, hey, which table should I use? And remember, we have a couple of tables. We have table 1, table 2, and table 3. Now, table 3 was our finally constructed one, so I'm going to use table 3, and then I'm going to click New Worksheet, so it's in a different tab altogether, and then I hit OK. So then it's time to construct my pivot table. Let me just give myself more space here. So to construct the pivot table, what you do is you want to drag any of the headers that are up here in the top into one of these 4 quadrants. So for example, the absolute value, we can put this in the value tab, in the value quadrant, sorry. And by default, it says count. Now I don't want to count the number of transactions. What I may want to do is I'm going to click on this little drop down. And I don't want to count, I want to sum them together. So basically I want to add up all the absolute values together. And for now, they're just one lump sum because that's the only dimension that we used. But remember we created this debit and credit one. I'm going to put this one onto columns. Okay, so by clicking and dragging that into columns, and again, I clicked on debit and credit and I dragged that into columns, that's going to now separate them and give me my total credits and my total debits, which is great. So now I don't have negatives and positives. Now I have everything in a positive and I have everything on the debit and the credit side. Then what I'm going to do afterwards, and I'm going to grab on the description, and then I'm going to move the description down to rows. Okay, that way I have, and we're going to make this a little bit smaller so that way we can see everything. And by the way, some of these have really long names, like this one, which is the reason why it's very difficult to read, which is one of the reasons why I always recommend clean up your data before you do pivot tables. Let me actually do that real quick just so you can see the instant effect on the forms. So let me go into my other tab over here. And one of these that was very, very long, which one was it? I think it was a wire transfer somewhere. Let me search it. This was wire. Okay, and I'm going to change this to Banco Brazil, whatever the vendor was. Okay, so basically I cleaned it on the table, not on the pivot table. I have to clean it on my original data table. Then go back to my pivot table, and up here under Analyze, there's a refresh button. And when I hit refresh, that data should be cleaned up. And notice that my columns automatically got a little bit smaller, which is a little bit more manageable now. And again, it's going to be really, really useful to clean this data up before we actually build the tables. Okay, so that's an important part of this whole process. Okay, now the other thing I want to do is maybe use the date as another part of my row. So I'm going to grab my date and I'm going to bring it into rows, and I'm going to put it before description, not after, because after would be extremely messy. But if I put it before description, bring it up here. Let me just delete this for a second. Grab the post date and bring it before description. And QuickBooks 2016 will automatically break these down by month first, and then break them down by post date. So it's actually pretty neat how Excel does this. So you're going to see, in January, we have all the transactions for the 1st of January, and I can collapse that. And then I can see all my debits and credits for the 3rd of January, and I can collapse every single one of these if I wanted to. So I can just hit on the collapse button, which is here under the Analyze tab. It will say, it's like a little tiny icon that says collapse field, and I can collapse it all. And basically I have this would be, in a nutshell, my daily debits and credits. Now that could have some functionality, or maybe it doesn't have a lot of functionality. But what's cool is that I can use multiple Excel formulas to do more interesting things on pivot tables. So pivot table is not just about learning how to pivot the data. That's the easy part. The hard part is designing what data points I can use to pivot the data. For example, let me show you something. I'm going to remove the month one, so I'm basically just seeing dates. And then I'm going to right click on date, and then I'm going to click on group. And this says, okay, how do you want to group these columns? So what I can say is, look, I want to group this instead of by days or months. I'm going to group this by days, and I'm going to group it by every 7 days. And then I'm going to start it. Let's say, for example, that start date works. And then I'm going to hit OK. And basically what this is going to do, and it's super cool, super neat, is that what this did is just basically grouped it based on every 7 days. So it would be like sort of a weekly grouping. So you can analyze your debits and credits per week in this case. And I can open any one of them and kind of see the transactions that are inside of it. So if you look at, again, if you look at the February episode, we talk about cleaning up this data so it's less messy. So for example, you see all these Intuit payments. If I were to clean them up before, so let me just do that real quick. So I'm going to come in here and type Intuit, and I got all these payments here. I'm going to just, all of these, I'm going to call them Intuit Payment Solutions, just like that. So I'm going to copy all these here. So I'm basically renaming all the Intuit payments to one single vendor. So I'm cleaning it up before doing the pivot table. Then I'm going to go back to my pivot table and I can refresh. And now you're going to see that all this data has been collapsed into a single one for Intuit Payment Solutions, which is right here, 8848.69. And what's really cool about pivot tables is once you're looking at a particular set of information, for example, that 8848.69, and I want to know what's inside of it. Well, I can do a couple of things. One is I can grab maybe something particular about it and re-pivot it one more time. So maybe I can grab its value or something and bring it here on the rows, and I can pivot it one more time. You see that, how I can pivot one layer further. That may not be as good, but let me undo that and show you maybe something else you can do, which is we can double click on that 8848 number. So if I actually double click on that number, it will create a new report that drills down all the transactions that comprise that entire amount. So it's actually super neat. It creates a new tab with that information when you drill down. So if you're a QuickBooks user and you double click on reports to drill down, you know exactly the feeling of how great it is to be able to do that. So that's one of the really powerful things about pivot tables. Now, let me delete this pivot table and let me try this again. Okay, and let me do the pivot again and go to insert pivot table. And now let's do it a little bit different. What we're going to do is we're going to audit transactions that are only maybe high value or maybe low value. So I'm going to grab value and make that my initial row. So basically I'm going to have high, low, and medium. Then I'm going to make maybe my date my second row. So then it's going to be all grouped by date, month by date. And then I'll make my vendor the next row. Okay. And then I'm going to go into absolute value, bring that into values. And then again, I want to represent these not as a count, but as a sum, because by default, Excel thinks that you're trying to count the number of transactions, and then bring debit and credit again into columns. So what's really nice about this is, for example, if I wanted to just look at my low transactions first, and I can look into these first. And where's my, oops, I put amount. That doesn't make any sense. Where's my description? There you go, description afterwards. So I can look at, for example, I can start with all my, let me just collapse here high. So I can start by looking at all the low transactions first. And I can look at all the transactions. And again, I can collapse by month and saying, let me look at my low transactions for January by date. Okay, maybe I don't even need date. I can just get rid of the date here altogether and just leave it by month. So then I'm looking at all my transactions are on the low side. So maybe I can start by looking at low transactions first, then I can collapse that. Then I can look at medium transactions after, again, because they may have different context, right? You know, maybe with low transactions, I don't need receipts. Maybe with medium, I do. And maybe with high, it could be a different issue. High could be maybe a major purchase, or it could be, a purchase of an asset. It could be transfer of money to an owner. You know, there could be different things. So sometimes it helps to group them together into these logical groupings, and that's basically the work that you do previous to the pivot table, which is adding additional columns to the initial data table, and we may be using VLOOKUPs in some cases. So, for example, let's look at transaction type, and we'll group that all together. That way, I see all my checks first, and then I can look at all my check debits, and I can go this to high, and then I can look specifically for those checks. So remember that we wrote in Amex that was written on the check, and John Smith that was written on the check. So just a couple of examples, and then we had John Smith written on a check, and that's work that we did through the VLOOKUP. Again, so that's VLOOKUPs and pivot tables in a nutshell. So I want to see if I have any questions. It doesn't look like I have any questions. This was actually a short or a brief presentation. Let me run my last question, which is going to be specifically related to pivot tables. Did you learn something new related to pivot tables? And as you answer those questions, let me see if there's any questions here. No questions from anyone. Somebody's commenting, hey, I never really understood what false and true was on the VLOOKUP. This finally clarified it. Good, excellent, perfect. Now, interesting enough, I'm getting a little bit different answers for pivot tables. So go ahead and answer as much as you as possible. Answer so I can get a good sample. We had 83% of the people in this case, pivot tables are new. So that basically I draw the conclusion that people are not using pivot tables or they're underusing them. Okay, and if pivot tables are particularly requested, we can do a deep dive on pivot tables because there's calculated fields which make pivot tables a lot more complex. Anyway, next other webinars that I'm involved with, we have QB Power Hour tomorrow on Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern, and the topic's going to be updates on the QuickBooks Pro Advisor program. So if you're a Pro Advisor, you don't want to miss that one. If you want to register, go to qbpowerhour.com. Those are free. Then the next episode for Enterprise Expert is going to be April 19th, which is going to be on QuickBooks Enterprise hidden tricks we're going to cover on that one. And then the next Tax Power Hour, I didn't write it down there, but that's going to be the first Wednesday of April. I believe it's April 3rd or April 5th. And we're going to talk about independent contractors versus employees on that particular episode. Anyway, our website is under construction. We're putting together some content. Please join the Facebook group. Continue the conversation, ask questions, share information, and email me if you have any questions. If you need to hire me for Excel consulting work, or if you just have general questions about Excel, I may be able to answer quickly via email. Or if you want to suggest some topics or get involved and maybe present me with a guest speaker that's well known to be an Excel expert, go ahead and email me for that as well. Anyway, thank you very much for attending. If you're a tax preparer, good luck with the rest of tax season. Otherwise, our next episode is going to be in May. So I'll see you in a couple of months. Thank you very much.